Mentoring is important because as a preacher, I want to keep growing and improving. One thing I love about preaching is it's something I can keep improving on. I just think I can and should get better. I've been preaching now for probably 40 years, and I would hope in the next 10 years I'll keep growing as a preacher. You see, preaching isn't like golf, I don't think, where if you play golf you have a handicap. And maybe you know at a certain point your handicap is 15 and that's as low as it will get. You're never going to get to 14, so you just enjoy being at 15. That's not preaching. I think we can keep improving as preachers, and I want to keep improving. And the best way to do that, I think, is through mentoring, through coaching. I tell the people I coach in preaching and train, there are lots of ways to keep growing as a preacher. It's good to read about preaching. There's some very fine books being published about preaching here in Australia. Murray Capel has a book called The Heart is the Target, about applications, which is wonderful. Gary Miller, Phil Campbell, Saving Eutychus, which is very practical. So there are some terrific books which keep feeding your mind and helping you grow. It's important, I think, to attend a preaching conference from time to time. Here in Melbourne, Ridley Melbourne has a terrific annual conference on preaching. This year, the theme is Preaching Doctrine, with Peter Adam and Peter Jensen, two men who spent their lives preaching doctrine. And these two men together, to learn from them would be a terrific opportunity. So that's a great way to spend 3 days going to a preaching conference. To look at and listen to other preachers is really worthwhile. To learn from them, both the good and the bad. And not just Christians. I often listen to TED Talks, which you find online, which are kind of secular sermons. They're 20 minutes, preached by really people who are evangelists for their cause. Their cause might be prison reform or domestic violence or poverty, but they're evangelists. They speak without notes, they're well structured, they're engaging. Just to watch them communicate and try to persuade their people of their case, you learn to preach from watching them. There's a crime writer called Michael Robotham, who's Australian. He's asked about advice he gives to potential would-be crime writers. And he said this: write, 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 and when you're sick of writing, write some more. And that's right. Keep on doing it. Keep on preaching. And he said, and read other writers. Not just the great ones, not just the Tolstoys and the Thomas Hardys, because you just get discouraged by the great ones. Read ordinary writers. And as you read their book, he says, take their book apart as you would an alarm clock. And ask yourself, what makes this book work or what makes it not work? So I listen to other sermons and I ask the same question. What makes this sermon work or why does it fail? Haddon Robinson is a famous trainer of preachers, and Robinson said as a young boy he'd hear sermons. He'd ask himself, why does this sermon feel like an hour and it's 20 minutes, and this one feel like 20 minutes when it's an hour? What makes a sermon work? So read, go to conferences, listen to sermons and learn from them. But to grow as a preacher, two things are critical, and one I've already mentioned. That is just to keep on doing it. So in my classes, as I coach men and women on preaching, we spend our time with them doing it, with them preaching. You may have heard of the 10,000 hour rule, which simply says you reach a point of some expertise by doing it again and again. I'm a great fan of the Beatles. And as you may know, in the early years, they lived in Hamburg, where they said they would play for up to 6, 7, 8 hours a night, rehearsing their craft. Then they went back to the UK and became famous. But they spent years honing their craft. They were playing 8 hours a night before they wrote and sang 8 days a week. But they just put the hours into it. The same with a preacher. You put your hours in, you must do it again and again. But you need more than that. You need more than 10,000 hours. Because if you're making a mistake in your preaching, just doing it again and again just makes you a more competent mistaker. You need something else. You need a coach, a mentor, someone to watch you preach and to give you feedback. That's critical. That's what we do in our classes. As I coach preachers, I listen to them preach. I give them feedback both on how they handle the Bible how they apply it, and how they deliver. I put a mirror up to the preacher and say, look at what you're doing. And I say to people I coach, I can guarantee, almost guarantee, if you spend some time being mentored and coached in preaching, you will improve. You'll get a mirror to your failings, your faults, the traps you're falling into, and be able to rectify them. As a preacher, I want to bless God's people. I want to handle God's word as faithfully as I can, apply it prophetically, and keep my hearer engaged. And that takes constant work. That takes constant training, and the best way to do that is through mentoring and coaching.